Welcome to my review of The Martian, directed by Ridley Scott, a sci-fi drama that centers on astronaut Mark Watney as he is believed to be dead by his crew after being viciously tossed by debris and as a result is left stranded on Mars with limited supplies and his not so limited knowledge and skills of botany. So The Martian is directed by Ridley Scott, who has brought us such classics as Alien, Blade Runner, a film that I have not seen but I'll get around to seeing it one day, so do not freak out about that, Black Hawk Down, Gladiator. But as of recently, his career has been kind of bumpy, to say the least. From what I remember of Robin Hood, it was pretty bland. Then there's something like Prometheus, which I actually was a fan of. I think it's actually a pretty good summer blockbuster, but apparently no one else thinks so because everyone hates it. And then there's something like The Counselor. The screenplay was written by Cormac McCarthy, who's known for writing such great pieces of literature such as The Road and No Country for Old Men. So it seems as if that this would be great, but unfortunately it just wasn't. It was convoluted and just very uninteresting with characters that I could give a shit about. And then there's Exodus, which at the time I thought was borderline bullshit, but what pulled me back into the film was the set pieces towards the tail end. I kind of let it slide by based upon that, but looking back on it now, the film's kind of terrible. So now we have something like The Martian, and right from the very beginning of the movie, I got a really good sense that this movie was going to be Ridley Scott coming back to form. There were a handful of aspects that reminded me of Alien as I was watching, especially in the beginning where there's like the sandstorm. It looked something straight out of Alien. But also in the music. And since I am on the subject of music, and this is something that I thought was pretty cool, there's this track called Mars on the score. And it sounded very, very similar to this other track from a video game, Zelda Twilight Princess. Don't believe me, look it up. It's called Snow Peak. Compare the two of them. And I'm probably the only person to even mention that, ever, but I just thought that was something neat. Now, visually, this film looks quite impressive, whether you're talking about the cinematography or the visual effects. They all look great. Now, I'm not entirely sure how much CGI is in this film. It didn't look too CGI heavy. I mean, obviously there is some CGI, but it looks like it kind of held back and it used it when it was absolutely necessary and didn't just rely on it like a Peter Jackson film. And as a side note, I did see this movie in 3D, and I'm not a big fan of 3D outside of Gravity. And here, it's okay. It's not a necessity. If you had a choice, I would just say, go with the 2D. But if you have no other choice than the 3D, it's okay. It's not very bothersome. It's okay. It's alright. One thing that I really need to praise this film on is how intelligent and scientific it is, and how it doesn't talk down to its audience. Now, it does put things in layman's terms here and there to, of course, fill you in, but I think it's done really, really well. And of course, I wouldn't know, but from what I understand, the science that is present in this movie is actually quite feasible. So if that is the case, that is actually pretty awesome. Now, what really sets this film apart from a lot of Ridley Scott's latest work is that this film is actually quite lighthearted and quite funny. It's not something like Exodus or The Counselor, Robin Hood, where it's just incredibly dry. No, there's a lot of flavor to this movie. Some may even say that there's actually too much flavor. I really, really liked it, and it really kind of seemed as if Ridley Scott just kind of took a step back and said, okay, screw it. I'm going to have fun with this project. And it really did kind of seem as if that was the case. It's kind of like how I see M. Night Shyamalan and something such as The Visit. Although it's far from a great movie, I think it's a really good movie. A lot of fun. A movie that didn't take itself too seriously and was an actual passion project by M. Night Shyamalan. A movie that he actually wanted to make. And it shows in the film. And this is the same way in The Martian. And Matt Damon is great in this movie. In fact, this is probably the best performance I've seen by him in a while. And it's not something that's going to garner any kind of award buzz. At least I don't think it will. But it is a great performance considering that it is him holding this film together, carrying all that weight. Because there are long stretches in this movie where it's just nothing but him dealing with the elements on Mars, working out the science, and talking to the webcam, us, the audience. And although he is a bit of a bro, he's somebody who is very likable, very charismatic, charming, just a really cool dude. Oh yeah, and he's also a freaking genius. As for the other performances, they're all really good, especially Chiwetel Ejiofor, and if you do not know who that is, you should, because he was Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave. Brilliant actor, and he's got a great screen presence, and I really enjoyed him in this as well. Now, I do have a couple of issues with this movie, one being that since this movie is so lighthearted and funny, and the fact that Matt Damon constantly cracks jokes throughout this entire film when shit goes wrong, It's really hard to feel any genuine sense of peril when something does go wrong. As for the second problem, I did find the scenes on Earth to be as enthralling as the scenes on Mars, obviously because it's Mars versus Earth. And honestly, I think this film would have actually worked better if it were more of a bottle film. And here's a little fun fact about Gravity, the movie, obviously. Originally, Warner Brothers, they wanted there to be scenes, flashbacks, with Sandra Bullock and Ed Harris, them on Earth, and it was going to switch to Sandra Bullock, obviously, in present time in space. I'm so glad that was not the case because I don't think that would have worked all too well. I kind of wish that this movie had taken that approach, something along those lines, but of course it did not. In other words, I think this would have aided in immersion, and since I am on the subject of Gravity versus The Martian, very different films, but since they both utilize 3D, I want to bring this up. The reason why the 3D works in something like Gravity is because of the limited cutaways, and The Martian, there are a fuck ton of cutaways. Pardon my language. So in other words, I've yet been convinced that the more conventional ways of filmmaking work well with 3D, unlike something like Gravity, which was something that was made with like a mindset of a theme park ride. As for how I would compare The Martian to something like last year's Interstellar, because they are more similar, I gotta say that I like Interstellar a lot more because I was much more emotionally involved in that film, with the protagonist played by Matthew McConaughey. And not only that, but visually, I was more impressed by Interstellar, but then again, that's like IMAX versus 3D. Although I will say this, I think The Martian is a little tighter because it's a little safer, while something like Interstellar is sloppier, but a little bit more ambitious. Overall, The Martian is a really good, lighthearted, fun film, and it's the kind of film that you probably could take maybe your grandparents, your parents to go see, because it's a bit of a feel-good movie. It's one of those, but it's a really incredibly well-made feel-good movie. Or at least in terms of how this film compares to other films of that category. As for my rating, I was quite perplexed with this one. I didn't love it, but at the same time, I really do respect it. I do think it is a really well-made film, and it is one of the better ones I've seen this year. So I'm going to give The Martian a very light, borderline 4 out of 5. If you're somebody who has seen The Martian, let me know your thoughts on it, and I do apologize that this is up a week late. That's because last week Sicario got its wide release, so I saw that instead. And originally, I wasn't even going to see this movie in the theater. I was going to wait till this came on HBO to check it out. But I'm glad I did. It's a really good movie. As for Sicario, I would recommend that probably over something like The Martian, but then again, I mean, that's if you're willing to watch something that is, well, not The Martian, that is lighthearted and fun. The Sicario is not like that at all. I do have a review of that, so do check that out. As always, I'm Colin Kirkland, and thank you so much for watching.